You know what I mean? I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and we are in the best part of the season. This is the time where all of these teams who have underperformed come alive in the playoffs. And of course, I'm talking specifically about Vitality, aka the future spring champions. They've been trolling us for about 3 months now, but this is just an elaborate ruse, and they will be very good when it's all said and done. Before I get started and introduce my guest, I just want to say thanks to Thrive Fantasy. So we still have the 100% deposit match using the promo code PIKEL. Link is in the description below. If you deposit $10 or more and play in a contest, you get two $20 contest entries. If you deposit $100 and play in a contest, you get four $20 contest entries. Now, I don't know if you know what that means, but you're basically getting a 100% deposit match and then $80, which is more than 100%. So that's pretty good. Alex knows a little bit about numbers and math. So let's bring in our guest. You'll see him on Twitter every once in a while. I've kind of shouted him out a few times, and we've gone through like what he says on Twitter and stuff like that. So welcome, Alex. How's it going?
I'm doing good, yeah, and thanks for having me on. Just kind of a numbers guy. I've built some models for the last 3 seasons betting on League of Legends, and it's gone pretty well, so happy to talk about it.
How long? You play League too, right?
Yeah, I've played since Season 1 back in college, and I'm not very good, but way better at betting than playing.
Who's your favorite champion?
Probably Caitlyn or Tristana. I'm an AD carry player.
Okay, respect. And who's your favorite professional League of Legends team?
Favorite professional league? Right now it's Anyone's Legends, but it changes by the night, so...
Yeah, so I mean every time that they're playing, it's always just like, how much money will I lose on Anyone's Legends tonight? And like, I feel like I always get them wrong. I feel like I always get Fred Brion wrong. I feel like I almost always get Rare Adam wrong. There's just like the teams that, I just don't like, and that ends up with me losing money on them. But enough about that. Let's get into the LEC playoffs. So we have 6 teams left. We have Rogue, Fnatic, G2, Misfits, Vitality, and Excel. That is not in order of their seeding or anything like that. That's just, those are the top 6 teams. So before we start talking about the playoffs in general, let's find out a little bit more about Alex's tier list. So Alex, what do you think about the S tier teams and everybody else? Like, I think most people probably agree with you with that starting point. So how did you come to that conclusion?
Sure. So I think one of the first models I ever built was looking at towers and tower differential for teams over the course of the season. And I don't, it has a small like ROI, but I think it's a pretty good indicator of overall team strength. And Rogue and Fnatic, I think, are just the 2 best teams in the league. Depending on recent form and how much you factor that in, you can make an argument for, if you really care about it, Fnatic might be better than Rogue. And if you really don't care about recent form and think that player quality, like just in the context of their career, is better, then maybe you like Vitality. But
maybe
I think I think in terms of the 2 best teams in the league, I think it's pretty comfortably Rogue and Fnatic.
Yeah, and it's always, I know that like on my channel specifically, I talk a lot about talent and champion pool and those kinds of things, because that just seems like a better way to predict who the underdogs are going to be that have a chance to win. And I feel like in most sports, when you can in most sports for betting and DraftKings, when you can figure out the underdogs that have a realistic chance of winning, that's where you're going to make a large chunk of your money. And it's interesting that you brought up the tower stuff, because when the whole League of Legends boom kind of happened during COVID and because of COVID, I realized there was so much information out there that was wrong about League of Legends because they were looking at it more from like a statistics perspective of like the numbers that were the outputs at the end of it, but they didn't understand like the little stuff that people who played League of Legends for a long time would understand. And like something with like towers specifically, I think in a professional context, when you have a team that constantly is able to like get first tower and the other teams aren't responding fast by being able to trade a tower or something like that, it's because the game script that they're forcing on their opponent they like weren't ready for. And if you're the kind of team who like continuously has a tower disadvantage, it just means that you're probably not playing the early game well enough in reading the map and understanding like how to make that initial trade. And it turns League of Legends into like positional League of Legends, where it's like, yeah, right now you only have a 1 tower disadvantage, but now there's going to be so much pressure built up in the jungle, it's going to cause one of your other towers to fall down, and it's all like the snowball effect that we're all pretty familiar with. So let's go into the next tier of teams. So you have a gap between A and B. So how much does that like what's the value of having that large of a gap in your tier list?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of there are no teams that I think are or that my model thinks are, really close to this like elite level. I think there's a pretty steep drop off in talent. Not saying like these teams are, never going to beat the teams above them, right? If, I think if Rogue played Misfits, we can get into this later, but it's probably like a 70-30 in a best of 5 between an S tier team and a B tier team, right? And so if you just off the top of your head want to say, every tier is like a 10% gap. So maybe S to A would be 60-40 and then S to B would be 70-30. That's how, that's not exactly how I did it, but that seems to be like a pretty rule of thumb pattern that you can follow here.
Yeah, so mine was pretty similar, and I showed that in one of my other videos, but it's basically like based on tiers. It's agnostic of like S versus A or A versus C. It's just like the number of tiers that separate teams, and I have it the exact same way. So a 2-tier difference is 70-30. Like that's just what the sports books generally have it at. That's what I have it at. So like we're kind of in step with that, and that's why when we were talking about making this video, that was one of the things I suggested was to put it into a tier list, because like a lot of the times that helps you have like a common language or whatever. So the last team is XL, and I think most people agree that XL is the last place team in the playoffs. So is there anything specific about XL that you think is like a deficiency of them compared to the rest of the teams in the playoffs?
It's tough to say specifically why, in terms of like a player level or like a strategy level. A lot of how I feel about this stuff is just kind of what does the model say, which that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I think they're just a weaker team, and there's a lot of reasons that can happen, and a lot of, whether macro or micro, but I think they would just be a definitive underdog against every other team.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying about how you think it might be a cop-out, but at the same time, there's so much of like the human element when you're putting together a model, and like if your model spit something out that said XL was the best team left in playoffs, you'd be like, well, that's kind of weird. I don't think that's accurate, so let me kind of adjust the numbers until something more realistic pops up. So I have a very similar tier list. I'll just go through mine again, and I think mine has been pretty static for most of the year. And the tier list that I ended up on for the playoffs and everything kind of took the sportsbook into consideration as well. So I have Rogue and Fnatic in the top tier on their own. Then I have Vitality in the A tier on their own. Then I have Misfits in G2 with like in the B tier. And then in the next tier is XL. And I also have Mad Lions above XL. Like I think if we kind of hit the reset button going into summer, we should think that Mad Lions will be better than XL. And that's also kind of a hedge for me, because I've been pretty anti-Mad Lions and anti-Elyoya specifically for like a year. And it's me thinking to myself, well, I don't think he's that good, but I also don't think he's that bad, and maybe the team around him just isn't playing as well as they really can in the future. So that's kind of that. Before we get into the next portion of the video, I'm going to talk about the bets that I still have. So in like the beginning of February, I put $20 on XL to win 520, and I have $50 on Vitality to win 350. I also made like the odds that I think they all have right now. So the LEC markets like aren't around right now, but if they were, and I guess you can't see my screen, right?
No.
Okay, so I'll just kind of say what I have, and you can kind of, or actually, I'll ask you then. So do you have percent odds for each individual team to win at this point? Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm assuming your first team is Rogue or Fnatic.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
so what percentage of the time do you have Rogue winning?
I have it 48.3
Wow,
pretty often.
wow. So that's a lot. That's a very high percentage of the time. So you said 48% of the time. So.
Yeah.
So I think that the odds that are on the market or the most recent time was like closer to 3 something, like plus 360, which would be closer to a 22% chance to win in general.
I'm way off there then.
Yeah. And the way that I got to my numbers was I used my tier list to kind of project out the games. So in their first round matchup, Rogue is going to play Misfits. And I agree with you completely. I think that Rogue against Misfits, it probably is somewhere around the minus 230 number, which implies that they win 70% of the time. So I just took 0.7. Then in the next round, that means that they would be playing most likely against Fnatic. So if they're playing against Fnatic, I think that it's about a 50-50. So it's 0.53. So 0.7 times 0.53 times 0.6 in the finals, because I have Rogue against Vitality in the finals. So that would be 0.7 times 0.53 times 0.6 is 22.26, and that's plus 360. So if the sports book out there, which I wouldn't bet this number. You would probably bet this, or you would bet this number because you have 20 something points of an advantage over the book. Yeah,
Smash that number. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't even know if there are a lot of books out there that are still offering LEC outrights, but that would be a great number to get to. And then I guess the other way, so since you don't necessarily have access to a sportsbook with futures odds, does that mean that every individual matchup you're probably going to have some kind of big edge over the sportsbook in those 3 individual matches, right?
No, I think I get those exact same numbers or pretty close. It's just a double elimination bracket, and
Okay.
having a higher seed puts you farther ahead in the losers bracket.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you win, you get directly to semis in that first round, which is a huge advantage, right? When you lose, if you lose and you're the higher seed, you also skip like one match ahead in the lowest bracket. So, them just being what I think is the best team, and then having a double elimination format heavily favors them. If it was single elimination, I would get probably much closer to what you have.
Okay, sure. So team 2, I'm assuming it's Fnatic, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so what percentage of the time does Fnatic win in your mind?
34.6.
Okay. So again, 36% would be around plus what? Plus 3 plus
It's
400?
Probably plus 200, right?
Yes. Yeah, that'd be 33%, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I guess plus 250-ish then. Something like that. So I have it at plus 400, and that's with in their first match up against G2. I have them as a 70% favorite as well because of the 2-tier differential. Then in their second match against Rogue, I have them as a slight underdog, so it'd be times 0.47. And then the match after that would be times 0.7. Yeah, 0.7. So this means that they beat G2, beat Rogue, and then beat Vitality in the finals. Which, it could happen. I would love it if it played out that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get pretty close to what you have. I sent you my numbers for every matchup possible in the playoffs. So for Fnatic G2, I have it 68% Fnatic. Fnatic Rogue, I have 45-55, and then Fnatic Vitality, I have it 70-30. So pretty close to what you have.
Yep.
But again, that I just have them as a much stronger team than everyone but Rogue. So, and that double elimination bracket really comes into and helps a team like that. So
yeah, and then next up, and I think this is definitely where the being in the winners bracket thing kind of helps out a lot more for the numbers that I was using. I have Misfits and G2. I have them as at this 4.79% each, and that's plus 2,000 for each of them. I probably wouldn't. if it was plus 2,000. I don't think. First of all, you're not getting plus 2,000. A sports book is not going to say plus 2,000 for any of these teams because it's 1 out of 6 teams, and they're just not going to do that. I don't think at this point. So actually, what was their number before? Because I have some of the older numbers. So when this was in February, you could have gotten Misfits. You could have had Misfits at plus 2,000. G2 was at plus 350 because of their like good run at the beginning of the season. So that's why you have to be really careful betting those kinds of numbers when somebody's hot. You don't want to be anywhere near that team. And then my last team is Vitality, or actually I guess not the last team. The 5th seed, I have them at 0.4, and I have XL. It's like an extremely difficult situation for them to actually win. For a sports book to release odds that makes me feel comfortable betting it'd have to be like plus 10,000. And again, you're not getting plus 10,000 from anybody at this point, because that's like a 0.4% chance to win. And then last but not least, I have Vitality at 6.65, and it's just so much more difficult because they have to win 5 matches, and I think that they should be favorites in like 4 of those matches, but in the finals, they will be an underdog most likely. And if it's not the finals, like it'd be in their like last game in the losers bracket or something like that, because they're going to have to play Rogue or Fnatic at some point if they go on this insane miracle run. So let's go over the 3 matches that we're definitely going to have. So do you have a preference on which one we talk about first? Let's just get Vitality and XL out of the way. So what are your thoughts on something like Vitality and XL? Like obviously we both think that Vitality is the better team, but like how granular do you get? Like do you look at specific matchups and things like that, or is it mostly just the model is the starting point and then you see how you feel about actually betting on it?
Yeah, I think that second option is mostly what I do. There's a bit of it's a bit of a feel game in terms of like if I look at something and I don't quite like it. So as part of this, I did adjust Vitality up a little bit. When I first ran it, I think I got 44% XL, which would make the plus 146 SCN Pinnacle a bet. Mm-hmm. And then I adjusted it, and I got about a 40% on XL now. So I have it as a no bet against Pinnacle lines. But if that line moves a little bit towards XL, I could see myself taking a flyer on it as like a value.
Yeah.
Value series.
Yeah. It's funny, like XL during this season when they made that change and went from Advienne to Mickey, it seemed really like not stupid. Like if you can get a good player into your team, most of the time you're going to try to do that. But I didn't really expect them to be as competitive as they have been. But it comes back to player talent in my mind at that point, because Finn is somebody who I was mercilessly shitting on for like a year because of the $3 million price tag when he went to CLG. Like that was absolutely nuts. Like that just shows you how little a lot of these teams actually understand about like League of Legends or how to run an organization. Like just like a relatively average player in the LEC for $3 million is out of control.
Yeah, there was a joke I saw on Hockey Analytics Twitter, a few years ago. A hockey team should hire me and pay me $1 million a year to say no 3 times a year to something stupid the GM says, and I would save them so much money, right? And it's the same thing is true here. Like a lot of these decisions are like they're not getting, the Sword Art thing, the perks thing, the Finn thing. They're not getting like terrible players, but like the investment they're making is just not worth what they're getting. So
yeah,
there's a lot of value in getting told no by someone that's just thinking a little bit there.
Yeah. So Finn against Alphari. The thing about this matchup, and I think this is kind of true for Vitality against XL in general.
You muted yourself.
I muted myself?
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. So for Vitality and XL, the thing that's true in most of these matchups, I think, is that Vitality is often going to be the team that I think we might have lost him. Vitality is often the team that's going to be playing the more aggressive side of a matchup, take more risks on the champion selection and things like that. So when we have Alphari against Finn, Alphari is definitely the better player. You're back.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Discord's having some fun, but
yeah, we're all good.
All right, yeah.
So yeah, I'm basically just going through the Vitality against XL matchup. So I think that Vitality is going to be the more aggressive side almost all the time, and they're the ones who are going to make more unique champion decisions and stuff like that. And it kind of goes in line with the team identities. So Alphari against Finn, they're both good enough to play both sides of most matchups. But I think that Alphari is just a better version of Finn. And I don't really see a situation where XL is going to be like, we're going to play super aggressive in the early game, and then we're going to try to snowball and just fight Vitality every objective every step of the way. Like, if XL wins, I think that it's going to be a very conservative game plan from them, because why would you introduce variance into a matchup against a team that I think most people just agree is better than you? So then Self-Made against Marcoon, kind of the same thing. And they're like, the champion pool that Self-Made has had, it's not that it's unique, but he's always looking for these like farming style champions that he's going to be able to do a lot of damage in the mid to late game. And we saw that specifically with like Diana Yasuo and stuff like that. If they continuously play Diana Yasuo and then like bring in a Renekton and they have some kind of like lethality Xayah, you're just kind of asking for trouble, because XL's team identity is centered on having a strong hyper carry, Patrick on a strong hyper carry, and then like scaling well and just one team fight that you can kind of win from a losing position. And that's a good thing for playoffs if you're as talented as the enemy team. So that's kind of what the big question mark is going to be, because I think that Perkz against Nukeduck is going to be kind of it is lopsided in my mind, but again, that's why you have to draft the champions, because Nukeduck is going to get the easier side almost every single time. He doesn't have to play out of his mind and be a mechanical genius in order to beat Perkz, because Perkz will probably take the sketchy side of a matchup. So I have it at 70-30. And then I have your numbers up here too. What was yours?
Yeah, I have it as a 60-40. So no bet versus Pinnacle lines, but if it drifts towards Vitality, I might push it back on the Excel side.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have any other thoughts specifically about Vitality and XL? Like, is there anything in your model that like makes implications about how the team plays, or is it kind of agnostic to all that?
It tries to be agnostic. I think like everything you said, I think I would agree with. I think there's a lot of value in recognizing when you're a worse team, and this is true in, I have a poker background, so this is true in poker, that maybe playing, a slightly less optimal strategy, but playing it perfectly, and it's easy to execute, so having a hyper carry and just kind of, we're all in on that, it seems like relatively easy to execute, and you can just play that really well. Whereas you let the better team try and execute a slightly better strategy, and if they do it suboptimally, then you win. And so I think there is value in that, knowing that if both teams execute perfectly, you're going to lose, but yours is way easier to, your end goal is way easier to achieve than theirs, the way they want to go about it. So that's kind of like my 1,000-foot view, and then that I wouldn't put much stock in because I'm bad at League of Legends. But the model, I would say, kind of likes Excel, or closer to Excel than the Vitality side.
Yeah, and I think it has kind of been like a somewhat popular thing to talk about recently. I know that Tim from Oracle's Elixir was talking about it at one point, where he was talking about burden of execution, and the burden of execution for a team like XL is much easier than a team like Vitality, because Vitality, while they could play, the slow scaling composition and then just out team fight them around like the Baron Pit or around like a late game Dragon, they take it upon themselves to play like hyper aggressive early game champions, and then if one of those ganks goes wrong, or you lose one team fight around Dragon, or XL pulls off a good gank in general, then you're behind the 8 ball, and the other team was supposed to be conservative and outscale you, but they're already kind of on pace to beat you because they like stole something away in the early game. So that would kind of does freak me out a little bit for Vitality, but I think that we'll learn a lot from them in like the first game or two, but by that point it might already be too late. Like, if they go into the first draft and they pull out one of these hyper aggressive team compositions, I'm going to be very afraid for my futures bet. I just want them to play it slow, but they're not going to.
They're the better team in terms of talent, though, so I think they should win, but it's just if they can execute, right?
Yeah. So then in the next match we have Rogue against Misfits. So we both have it at about 70-30. Give me your thoughts on it real quick, and then I'll do the lane by lane again.
Sure. Yeah, I think Rogue has just been the best team in the LEC this season, or this split, I guess. It's tough, I guess down the stretch they had some worse games, and if you factor in, maybe maybe you make a split between the first 9 games and the last 9 games, and you say, okay, maybe they're a bit weaker. I think that's fair. I kind of just look at the season as a whole right now, and I think they're just the best team. Misfits is obviously talented. As a fan, BTO is obviously really fun to watch and is capable of winning games on its own. But I think that they've kind of gotten some good breaks too. They've run pretty good, especially in that G2 game everyone's going to talk about. But I think they're a good team that has gotten some good breaks along the way. And I think Rogue is a very good team that has played like a very good team. So I'm not surprised I have it as a 70-30, and I'm not surprised we agree on that.
Yeah. So with Misfits, the most appropriate kind of sports analogy that I could make is probably turnover differential. When you have these teams in gigantic losing positions and the team like just throws away the game, like Misfits has been on the right side of that probably 4 or 5 times where they had this gigantic disadvantage and they shouldn't have been allowed back into the game, but for one reason or another, the team that was winning just made some kind of horrible mistake. And you need to be good enough and close enough in the match in order to take advantage of that situation. So I don't want to give them zero credit for that, but at the same time, like there's a reason why Neon hasn't been thought of as a very good player for most of his career. Hyrit, good but not great. VTO came in and everybody kind of had hopes of him being very good. Schlatan coming in. He really is. He's not a one trick. He's not like a Lee Sin one trick, but he is so much better at like he's so good at a couple of champions that I feel like that's where you can kind of target if you're Rogue, and that's where the best of 5. That's why it's so interesting when we get into best of 5s, especially in a region that is generally best of 1s. Like in the LPL or the LCK, it's a little bit more like it's more similar to the regular season than when you get into the LCS or the LEC, because now the teams aren't only thinking to themselves, it's a best of 1. Now they know, maybe we want to play something more risky than we normally would because it's a best of 3. Or maybe we just want to play 3 games conservatively because 2 out of 3 times we'll most likely win because we're the better team. The other thing that I would say about Rogue, and it goes in line with what you were saying about, do we think about Rogue as the first 9 games versus the rest of the season? And like Malrong, he has not shown exactly what he can do. He has played a specific subsection of champions. Like you don't make it onto Damwon and play not over Canyon, but play when they were going through that whole situation with like swapping in players last year. But he's definitely good enough to be on that level of a team. The question that I had going into the season was, is he going to be a true carry, or is he going to be more of like, not, I guess it's more like a tank jungler, utility jungler, where you're not necessarily asked to win the game on your own. Like you might be ganking often in the early game, and that's a high variance playstyle because if you don't execute any of these ganks, then you're going to fall behind a little bit in terms of in terms of gold. And if you look at the numbers, I'm pretty sure I was looking at it the other day, and Malrong is like, I think his CS per game is like 140 or something like that. And then you have these farming junglers who are closer to 180 up all the way up to like 200. And part of that's because of the champions that they're picking. I know that Malrong can play aggressive champions. He hasn't been forced to do it yet. And I don't know if this is a situation where he'll be forced to do that. So that's one kind of question or concern I have. Comp is a player that I've been pretty high on for a long time. Comp and Lebrov was a good combination. But then they kind of just, got rid of that because they wanted to they just wanted to try something new. They got rid of Comp for what was his name? Crown Shot. Yeah. So that killed me. I hated that so much when that happened last year. And then Larsen's obviously one of the best 3 mid laners most likely, and has been a consistent presence in the mid lane for a couple of years now. And then Trimby is a pretty good support, is very good at a few specific champions, and has made deep runs in the playoffs before, so we don't have to question him. And then Odoamne is like your quintessential European professional, so we don't have to worry much about him. Let's go to the next match. So we have Fnatic and G2. Fnatic and G2, this is a very interesting one to me, and I have a lot of problems with Fnatic. I just don't like Humanoid. I think he's like super overrated, and the reason why I say that, and it's because like the games where he looks bad, he just looks so bad. Like if G2 gives over Twisted Fate or feels obligated to pick Twisted Fate in this matchup, then the draft can go completely sideways, and that plays directly into Fnatic's hand. And that's the scariest thing, is like it's like a fastball pitcher. You know he's a fastball pitcher, or I guess it's more like it's a fastball hitter. You know they're a fastball hitter. You want to throw junk. But if they know that you know that they're fastball hitters, then you don't necessarily want to throw a fastball, even though it's your best pitch, because that gives them the best chance to like just hit a home run. And that's the humanoid situation with TF. Like if you're throwing curveballs and like not banning it out, or if you're throwing curveballs and banning it out and putting additional restrictions on your draft, it just becomes more and more difficult to get a draft that benefits your team, because you're thinking so much about what they're going to potentially do. But in the top lane, I think Broken Blade has really good chance of beating Wonder straight up. Jankos against Razork, I probably prefer Razork a little bit. I know that Jankos has been so good for so long that I could see him just like turning back the clock and having a really good performance. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Caps against Humanoid. Caps hasn't looked great this season. I definitely think he's a better player than Humanoid. I'm still recovering from those top 10 lists at Worlds last year where people were putting Humanoid as the top 10 player in the world. I almost died from that. And then Flocket and Targamas against Upset and Hylissang. Upset and Hylissang are definitely the better bot lane. And that's going to be another draft thing where Fnatic is most likely going to go for a hyper carry plus some kind of support for Hylissang that might try to take advantage of the early game, or he'll just play Leona Nautilus and reduce variance. So I think that I definitely want G2 to win, but I can kind of just emotional free roll it, bet on Fnatic. If Fnatic loses, I'm the happiest person in the world, and if Fnatic wins, I get money. So that's probably what I'll end up doing.
Yeah, I have it, again, pretty close to Pinnacle lines. I think, again, like G2 might be worth a value bet here. Depending on how you think of the matchups, that kind of stuff, you can tweak it one way or the other. But I think Fnatic down the stretch looked like the best team in the league. Obviously, it's tough to read into best of ones, and obviously they lost to like Astralis, so like, okay,
yeah,
it happens, I guess. But I think when every player on this team is on, like they're on, in terms of lane matchups, I think you've got it pretty well nailed down. Like the bot lane is probably the best lane in the LEC. Not that this like factors into, I'm tweaking this because, but I think you're completely right. In terms of like raw numbers and what I would bet, I'd probably bet G2, expecting to just get blown out because, Fnatic versus G2, and Fnatic's probably the better team.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, I think you've got a good read on Broken Blade. Might be the best top lane in the LEC. I think he's had a great split. So, and Wonder is obviously probably top 3.
Yeah.
I also wanted to make a point on the Rogue thing, just to go back 5 seconds. I think Trimby has a really good case to be the MVP. I think when you look at the history of Rogue and kind of when they were pretty good and not quite champion level, like then they added Trimby and Odoamne, and then they were the best team in the regular season, and they kept doing that and they kept doing that. They exchanged players and they're still up there. And I think if you just look at how they were before Trimby and Odoamne and then after, I think I'm not a good enough player to say why these things are happening, but I know what changed. I know who was responsible. It's probably one of those two guys.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to get that out there. I don't
Sure.
know if that's a hot take or not, but
I mean, it probably kind of is. So who was their support before Trimby?
Vander?
Yeah, so Vander at that point was not super skilled mechanically. Like, he was a good shot caller though. And then who was the top laner was Finn, right? Yeah, so that's kind of hilarious how that kind of stuff happens. But yeah, Finn we knew was overrated, so go into Odoamne. It's funny because Odoamne is probably out. It's not exactly what we anticipated. It's not like, Odoamne is going to come in and play the aggressive side of some of these matchups. But because of how League has kind of evolved over the past year, like that's exactly what he did, and he was actually pretty good at it. And it was sort of surprising because I think that the League of Legends metas in general haven't really allowed him to do that, and I think for a little while he wasn't on the best team, like in the 2020 season, I think, or that might have been 2019. But people had kind of forgotten that Odoamne was good at one point, and then he kind of turned it around. Yeah, so let's see. What do you think? What do you think is the? Because I think we kind of agree in general. So. Yeah. So the second matchup we think should be Rogue against Fnatic in the semifinals, and I have it almost a complete 50-50. I would definitely prefer the Rogue side. What do you think about that matchup?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, Rogue is going to get side selection, so the higher seed. So I have it 56-44 with Rogue on blue side. It changes by 2% if they flip, but yeah, I'd give Rogue whatever that is, minus 120 or something, minus 115.
Yeah. So yeah, in the top lane, Odoamne against Wunder. It's funny, if this was a year ago, I would be on the Wunder side for sure. But now it's not as clear. Like, I don't really trust my read from back then, because I always thought he was undervalued. But now that he's on Fnatic, I feel like you're almost necessarily accurately valued or overvalued, because if he was undervalued, goes to Fnatic, people like Fnatic, that kind of upgrades him a little bit. But like, how much better do you think people think that he is now that he's with Fnatic? Like, I'm not 100% sure. Razork against Malrong. I definitely prefer the Malrong side. I think, and like I said, I really don't think that we've seen the best out of him. So it'll be curious to see how that kind of evolves in playoffs, because in their first round matchup, I wouldn't expect them to change anything. When they go up against Fnatic, or whoever it is in the second round, if they feel like Malrong needs to be the aggressive side of a matchup, he might just completely like obliterate like the game state, and the draft will get flipped on its head. People will have a read about how to draft against Rogue, and then one thing changes, like Malrong playing an aggressive champion, and then you're screwed because now you have to play catch up.
Yeah, I think the Malrong thing is interesting because I had a completely different read on him coming into the season. He was on that 0-18 Jin team and filling in on Damwon. He was always known as this like really hyper aggressive guy that would, at least my read on him was this hyper aggressive guy that would take do level 2 ganks, that kind of stuff, and it would kind of blow up sometimes, and sometimes it would work. And I was really worried about that coming into the season, looking at how he graded out, that kind of thing. And he's obviously, that team is really highly ranked in my model, so I think he's done incredibly well this split. I think there's like maybe more variance in his play style than you're giving credit for, but I could also see him like having an extra gear, or playing even better, and just totally like blowing up a game with either. I think in both ways, either really good or really bad. But
yeah.
He obviously, when you have a team as talented as Rogue, and you have as opposed to like Jin Air where they went 0-18, you're going to have 3 winning lanes, or most of the time you're going to have extremely strong lanes, and it's a lot easier to play aggressive and take risks when your lanes are winning and can move to you and that kind of thing. So I think surprising to me, but I guess not to other people, like he's really worked out, and that series will be interesting to see, because that's going to be one that they really get pushed.
Yeah, for sure. And then the rest of it, Larssen against Humanoid. I'm not sure that Larsen's really the type of player to punish Humanoid as hard as like Humanoid should be punished. And that kind of reminds me of something that was just said on the LCS broadcast before. Bwipo was talking about Summit, and in maybe one of the most insane things that Bwipo has ever said, he said that Summit's playstyle is a result of him not playing against good top laners because he hasn't gone to Worlds. Like, Summit is from the part of the world where all the top laners are good. He plays against every LPL top laner in solo queue. He plays against every LCK top laner in solo queue. Like, going to Worlds, Bwipo plays against he plays against a subsection of a region, and like he boot camps against them sometimes, and he thinks like, oh well, I'm from the LEC, I play against Finn, I play against good players. It was just like the craziest thing. Like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing come out of his mouth. And then of course Summit plays Tryndamere and kind of like almost solo carries that game before. And that's kind of what the thing is with Humanoid. Like, I could see like if Humanoid went to like the LPL or the LCK, he would turn into like Cryan. Like, Cryan was a TF1 trick basically and got slapped around, and then you have people like Showmaker. Showmaker's not a TF1 trick, but he plays a ton of TF and he's very good at it. Like, it's Showmaker is like a good player. Humanoid is a good European player, but is a lesser player than Showmaker. And then you have players like Cryan, which are probably a lot closer to Humanoid than people would really want to kind of admit. But then, yeah, in the bot lane, I think you said before that Fnatic's bot lane might just be the best in the league, and it puts so much pressure on the other team to draft, because Upset, if you give him Jinx or Aphelios, he's going to be able to play both sides of that matchup. And then the big curveball in that situation is Hylissang, because Hylissang can play like 50 different champions in support. So if you get lazy on Rogue side and you're not thinking to yourself, how can they exploit this when we lock in like Leona or Nautilus, if there's a team that's going to abuse you for that, it's Fnatic. So I do like that about Fnatic. I like how they kind of draft. And it's funny because they have Yamato Cannon, and Yamato Cannon's another guy that I just don't like. But yeah, I want Rogue to win. This matchup specifically would scare the shit out of me because, like, it's like when you're playing rock, paper, scissors. Like, Fnatic is the one you don't want to play against. They're just, like, in my head.
They're very strong. And, I think we both agree this is an incredibly close matchup, and, like, splitting hairs on what can kind of happen. I'm a big Trimby fan, and I think, he can match Hylissang kind of blow for blow. I don't think he's as flashy or, like, he doesn't make the plays that Hylissang makes like that, or extremely crazy. Hylissang has this entire reputation built around it, but I think Trimby he kind of elevates the team as a whole, and I think I would look for him to match Hylissang's play, maybe in a quieter style. But I think you're dead on there. That I think Pomp's a great player. I think Upset is probably the best AD carry. Hylissang, absolutely, he's one of those guys that can just destroy a matchup. So it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah.
I think incredibly close game, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah,
we think that's going to be the matchup, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, that's the kind of match, like, I'm not even going to put money onto that match because it's like, it'll be a very good series to watch, and I don't need any money on it to have a dog in the fight. Like, I want Rogue to win. I don't want Fnatic to win. I want Fnatic to lose and for them to draft horribly so I can just make a video making fun of Humanoid and Yamato Cannon. That's all I want. That's all I want.
That easy.
So then in this situation, Vitality would have to play against G2 and Misfits. So instead of going into both of the matchups, who do you think is a better matchup? Who do you think has a better chance of beating Vitality, G2 or Misfits? Like, which one does the model prefer?
I have it G2 by 0.5%, so 53.2 to 52.7 for G2 versus Misfits against Vitality. So they're both extremely similar strength teams. Again, that's 52 to 47. Like, Vitality is a good team, and these are, upper bracket versus lower bracket. And this just highlights the problem with being in the lower bracket is you have to win, and then you have to win, 5 coin flips to win the whole thing. So I would very, very slightly prefer G2, and I could see an argument either way.
Yeah, I think that the weakest lane is probably the bot lane for G2. So that's what scares me, because, like, I don't think that Neon and Mursa are, like, great players by any means, but they are probably more consistent. I think that there was one point during the year where I was watching a G2 game and Flocked just walked the complete wrong way after a dragon fight and his team completely lost the game off of it, and I was like, are we looking at, like, Wild Turtle 2? Like, that was kind of my fear, and they've played really well overall, so I think I can't really be that critical of him. But I remember distinctly being super afraid of that situation. So let's go. So do you have Vitality as favorites against G2 and Misfits, or are G2 and Misfits favorites against Vitality?
Second option. Vitality's slight dogs against both of them.
Okay, that's cool. So I have it as Vitality against Misfits. I have Vitality as 60-40. It's probably like 60 to 43 because of the rake, but I have them at about minus 150 in both situations. So I'm going to be betting on Vitality in these spots, so that not only when they lose will they break my heart, but they'll also break my wallet.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And then I guess the last two matchups that we should kind of be concerned with, I guess, are the ones that you think are the most likely. So who do you think is going to be in the finals?
Surprise, Rogue Fnatic would be the two most likely to me.
Okay, and in Rogue Fnatic, we're basically just getting a semifinals rematch, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and you prefer Rogue in that situation. I think that the one that the situation that I think is maybe not even most likely, the one that I'm kind of projecting is Vitality against Rogue in the finals. So if I'm just going through Vitality Rogue specifically, I think that Alphari against Odoamne, again, it's the Alphari question, is like he is good enough to win any matchup, but it requires the draft to be one that he can take advantage of. Otherwise, it's just going to be like him going even. A lot of the times we've seen him playing things like Camille, not building up a large enough advantage in the early and mid game, and then it makes the rest of the game look super sketchy. So that's not a good thing in general. And Odoamne is not really someone who's going to make gigantic mistakes in the laning phase that Alphari can capitalize on without having like additional jungle resources or something like that. Selfmade against Malrong. I still think that Selfmade is one of the best junglers in the LEC. It's just that his team has the team compositions just don't make a lot of sense for the way that he should be wanting to play. When he was on Fnatic and like was the best jungler in the LEC, you could tell that the entire team composition was built around him and everybody played around him. Alphari, just my read in general is that he's like a selfish player, selfish person, like wants a lot of additional resources, isn't going to play around anybody, just let me do my thing in the side lane and we'll be competitive. But like you kind of need Alphari to like play for the team but not play Renekton, which I don't know if that situation is possible right now. So that scares me. And again, if Malrong shows it in the winner's bracket that he can kind of just blow games open, that might actually be the best case scenario for Vitality. So like if Rogue slaps Fnatic and then it's like through Malrong jungle diffing people, then we could get into a finals where it's super explosive jungle matchups, and I think that's probably the situation where Selfmade would be, where he would have the most winning chances, because it could be like carry versus carry in the jungle, and like snowballing from that position is going to be a lot easier to win. Perkz against Larssen. Perkz again is a more volatile side. Larssen is just going to play control mages probably and farm it out, and then you'll have to beat them at a late game team fight. And then Comp and Trimby against Carzzy and Labrov. Comp and Labrov going against each other. That'd be kind of fun to watch. Carzzy, the whole Carzzy thing kind of blew my mind, how he got like kind of unceremoniously kicked off of Mad Lions. But he hasn't really looked that good this year. So that's kind of sketchy. This is not their meta. Like we could easily get into a 2020 meta where it's a lot of utility AD carries playing a lot of Jhin. Like Jhin, Xayah, Tristana, I think were three of the main champions, and that's when Carzzy was like looking a lot better. But now it's just kind of scary. I think that just from pure champion pools, I think that Comp's side is probably easier to play, the easier side of that matchup. Larsen's is probably the easier side of the matchup against Perkz. Malrong is probably the easier side of the matchup against Selfmade, and that's a harsh reality that I kind of have to live with. So for Rogue Vitality, what are your thoughts on that matchup specifically?
Yeah, I think with Vitality, this team is so talented. Like, you can always rely on that. Like, every single one of these players, especially on the top side of the map, could be considered like top 3 in the role based on talent.
Yeah.
And you could always say like this team is too talented to be playing like this, just the way that they've played throughout the split. But after 18 games, I think when looking at it from like a math perspective and statistics perspective, like they are playing like this, and you kind of have to like factor that in.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to take the approach that their recent form isn't indicative or is more noise than signal for how they're going to play in a best of 5, that's very reasonable. I'm not entirely sure where I'm going to come out on the end of this. I think I've had to manually bump up Vitality because of that talent, and like just because I don't quite believe it myself, but I think, what do I have it as? Rogue versus Vitality, I have it as a 70-30, I think Rogue's just a better team, but I will say, this is if we played today. If Vitality wins 4 best of 5s and makes it to the finals,
exactly,
their rating will increase, right? And it won't be a 70-30 at that point. And that's the same for every single matchup we talked about. If Misfits 3-0s Rogue in the first round, I'm going to rate Misfits much higher in the second round because they've just 3-0'd the best team, right? So if they play today, I'd have it as a 70-30. If they play in the finals, I don't know where I'd probably have it, much closer than that, maybe a 60-40 Rogue. But I think Rogue has just played better, and they've shown that they're a better team so far. It really just depends how much you rate, their career player quality versus like the last 18 games.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think I made a point similar to that. I forget what region I was talking about when I said that, but it's like that you said it perfectly, where if they win all these best of 5s and they're in the finals, it's not going to be like, Vitality looked really sketchy the entire season. It's going to be like, Vitality turned it on during the playoffs and they're on the miracle run and now they know how to play League of Legends and their players are so good. And then all the edge would be gone at that point. So that's kind of why I didn't bet on it again. Like, I probably should have looked for a number to bet, like, to double down on them, because I'm not going to get great opportunities to bet on them outside of betting every individual match. So I'm not sure where that value is going to kind of be created. Like, maybe if they look really sketchy against XL, but then kind of get lucky and win that series, and then they're the underdog somehow against Misfits and G2, then I'd feel good. Then I'd feel like I didn't miss out as much on making money with them.
We call that the EDG at Worlds factor, where I that was great for me because EDG looked really bad, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's a Korean team's going to win," and then
Yeah.
they just won every best of 5 and won World Finals. So that was great.
Yeah, and that's like, I guess that also kind of goes back to the meta stuff that I was talking about. Like, when I was doing my Worlds tier lists, I had 4 teams in the top tier, and I said it's either going to be a mid jungle meta, and LNG is going to be insanely strong, Damwon Gaming is going to be insanely strong, or it's going to be an 80 carry meta, and Gen.G and EDG are going to be extremely strong. And we ended up getting one of each style of team in the finals, and at that point, anybody can win. Any talented team can win one match. So it really was a great world championship to kind of watch. I think we've been kind of fortunate the last couple of years, where like the Suning run was really cool to watch. Like EDG, Gen.G, Damwon, and like Korea in general playing well was a lot of fun to watch. But so let's go back to the individual teams. So let's start with XL. So if XL made a run, how do you see them making that run?
Boy, it would have to just be executing well on what they're good at. I don't know enough high level League of Legends to say like, oh, they should pick these things and exploit Vitality this way, yada yada. But it seems like they're clearly focused on their bot lane. Patrick has been the XL guy for a while, and it's probably going to be they get him on a hyper carry, they play around him, they find ways to get him leads, and then they just executing a hyper carry that's strong with some supportive characters around him, supportive champions around him. Seems like a really linear and easy strategy to execute. So I'd say it's probably on the back of that.
Yeah. So just them against everybody else. So like them against Fnatic, that's going to be a really tough style to execute. So if they win the first match, I could see them getting past Misfits. I could see them getting past G2 potentially with that kind of play style, because like specifically G2, if it's XL against G2, I could see XL winning that one for sure. It's really like, can they dodge Fnatic? I think that's what they would need. They would need somebody else to take care of Fnatic, and then, or actually, I guess, is that even possible? It's not possible.
Well, but they need Fnatic to beat Rogue in the semis, and then Fnatic's in the finals, and then they may just only meet Fnatic in the finals, right?
Sure.
Or yeah.
Otherwise, they have to play them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so they can't. Damn it, that would have been so much cooler if it was like the other style of bracket where it's like they're separated and then it kind of comes together. But it's like more of a gauntlet, so they will have to play them at some point. So that really kills XL for me. I don't think that they're going to be able to beat Fnatic specifically, because like Fnatic can counter that style the best. So Fnatic. Obviously, you think that Fnatic is strong in general. So if Fnatic makes the run and is the eventual champions, like how do you think they get it done? It's probably through bot lane too, right?
Yeah, I think both bot and top have that insane carry potential, and I think Humanoid is one of these guys that has performances, or like he plays the map when he can play the map well, and he plays the map well, and he sees everything that's happening. He's capable of putting pressure on it and making these plays and getting his lanes ahead. And so I would say top or bot carries, and Humanoid plays his role as the facilitator, the shot caller, the control mage player well.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I guess that is a good point, because like for all the shit that I talk about Humanoid, he can play that role. It's just I don't like how much credit he gets for playing that role. It's like it's really not that difficult, but that is what he would need to do in order to win. So then G2, in order for G2 to get to the finals, I think it's pretty easy. It's just probably let the other teams play the scaling side of matchups, where they're like, oh, we're just going to play Jinx, we're going to play Aphelios. And obviously, I don't want teams giving away Jinx. But if G2 can be drafting around that specifically, if they're forcing Aphelios a lot of the time, that could be a really good situation for them, where they let the team have Aphelios, and then you're just constantly attacking the Aphelios in the bot lane. I could see Broken Blade carrying a lot of these games. I could see Caps carrying a lot of these games. Jankos does definitely have the ability to, in the right matchup, and if they're playing hyper aggressive, then the chance to snowball is a lot higher. So I could see that being the way for G2 to go. Like if it remains some kind of meta where Jinx and Aphelios are getting traded every single match or every single game in a match, that seems like a lot worse for G2. So that would scare me.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, looking at the LPL games last night and looking the one LCS game we've seen is that top laners are starting to become really powerful in the meta. We're seeing a lot of Jax. Tryndamere was already in the meta, that kind of thing. But last night was RA versus Weibo, and Cube got Jax twice and just demolished, I think, right? So I could see Broken Blade just being the guy that carries G2 as far as he can take them.
Yeah.
And Jankos is the greatest Western jungler of all time, so I will never say that he's not exactly played elite, but I think he's been very, very good, and I think he always has that gear in him. Caps is same in that conversation for mid lane. The bot lane are two rookies, right? So they're kind of unpredictable, and I still don't have a great feel of how they play because it's only been one split. But they're clearly capable, and this team could clearly win. They have some of the greatest Western League of Legends players of all time on this team, and I think there's many ways for this team to get it done, and I think the meta and the champion picks are kind of rounding themselves out in favor of them, especially Broken Blade.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a good point because like with the whole AD carry situation, now that you have Zeri kind of involved as well as a potential champion, the top lane champions are not only about what their matchup is going to do in the laning phase, but it's how can I deal with the enemy AD carry? Am I strong enough to like solo carry a game against a Jinx? Probably not, unless they are put into a bad position. Like if it's like right now the Aatrox is being played by Someday. If you're Aatrox against Jinx, it's not great for you. But if you're a winning Aatrox against a losing Jinx who may or may not have flash, now you can kind of exert a lot of additional pressure and be the reason why your team wins. It becomes a lot easier for that top laner to be the deciding factor in a match when we're playing with like utility AD carries. So if you're up against a team that's playing a lot of Jhin or just an AD carry that can't hard carry as well, like if it's not Jinx, it's not Aphelios, or I guess Zeri, I'm not 100% sure what my read is on Zeri right now, but if it's that kind of meta where teams are constantly banning out Jinx Aphelios because they don't want the AD carry to have that option of just completely dominating a game, that is going to open up a lot of space for players like Broken Blade, players like Jankos, because you can either try to bait the enemy team into playing a hyper carry and then diving it, or you can ban them all out and then just outscale the utility champs. So that it would be pretty cool to see G2 make a run. I am kind of afraid about their bot lane though. Misfits is interesting. I think that they could definitely play. They seem probably the most flexible out of the four teams that we've talked about so far. Like if it is a utility AD carry meta, I think that does hurt a team like Fnatic. If it's a utility meta for Misfits, it just makes Neon's job a lot easier. Then you still have Vetio who can carry. You have Hyrit who's shown that he can carry in the past, and then Zlatan I think is able to carry as well. But I'm afraid of his champion pool. So with Misfits, I think that my biggest concern is Zlatan's champion pool, and I don't really believe in Neon and Mersa. What about you?
Yeah, I might be higher on Neon and Mersa than you are, but again, I don't think they're probably average LEC bot lane type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the Misfits top side of the map is incredibly strong, especially mid lane. And VTO is kind of turning into one of these players that it doesn't really matter what the meta is. It doesn't really matter what's you kind of just play around him because he can absolutely take over games, and he's done it consistently against the best. And yeah, here it can play carry champions, and so I think that's kind of boding well. I would be surprised if Misfits makes a run and VTO isn't front and center. Sure.
Yeah. And just taking a look at his champion pool, he's played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think 11 different champions. Cassiopeia, Zoe, Ryze, Orianna, Corki, LeBlanc, Syndra, Yasuo, Victor, Akali, Sylas. So he's playing a lot of different types of champions, which is definitely good for a best of 5 because that means that a lot of the time he can counter what the enemy has already done, or he can exploit something that they kind of didn't account for in their draft. So that does put a decent amount of pressure on on the draft. And it's funny because last year Misfits was the team that like my Discord lost out on so much potential money where like Misfits would have a gigantic lead and throw it away, and then this year they have all these gigantic deficits and then they like make a huge comeback. So it's funny how that kind of narrative has kind of flipped itself. Exactly. I can't believe I wasn't on that. But at the same time, it's like they had bad turnover luck, and then this year they have the best turnover luck of all time. So then what's going to happen when their turnover luck is just normal, you know?
Yeah, I think they've run pretty good. They're a very good team, but I think they've had some good breaks.
Yeah, and I think I really do think that the way that teams are going to attack them is going to be in the jungle. I feel like Schlatan is someone that you can kind of target. And then Rogue, we've talked about Rogue a decent amount already. I think in order for them to make a run, they can kind of do it anyway, which is one of the reasons why they're the best team right now in the LEC.
Yeah, totally agree. I think every lane is strong. I think Malrang will function well and has functioned well when that's the case. So I think there's possibilities are endless for the top teams here.
Yeah, you should reach out to one of these sports books and try to get Trimby MVP odds for finals.
The problem is that MVP is decided by like media and that type of stuff, and not necessarily like the best player. So I would have to like generate a ton of buzz on the Trimby side and make sure he's like in the running type thing.
That is true. Yeah, it's possible though. You can kind of manipulate that.
Yeah, even my 70 followers, all chanting at the LEC.
True. All you gotta do is get one big name involved. So like just keep telling LS that you think that Trimby is the best player in the world and see what he can do. And then last but not least, the main team in the LEC, Vitality. It's crazy to think that this season has kind of gone this way, but it almost seems like perfect because they've been going through this like difficulty of finding their identity as a team. A lot of the times their drafts don't look to make much sense. They're playing hyper aggressive for the early game, which definitely seems like a read on the meta, because they're probably thinking to themselves, we are better than all these teams. We should be able to win the early game hard enough to kind of just like win these best of ones. And in a best of one, that might be the best way to play a best of one, where like you're taking on the aggressive side of the matchup, because even if you low roll a lot of the time, you're probably going to win enough games to get in the playoffs. And now that you're in playoffs, you don't need to play as aggressive in the early game. But you've been like working that muscle enough to like if you feel like you need to do it, you can always kind of pull it out. But it scares me. It scares me a lot. I really want them to make this run, or at least just look like respectable. Because the thing is if they have a bad showing in this playoffs, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to make Worlds. Like it's the cumulative points or whatever, right? So they would need to have a really good showing in summer if they don't win a couple of matches in spring.
Yeah, I mean, again, this team across the board has some of the best players in the LEC. It's just, maybe they're just not meshing. I obviously don't know the internals, but they just have not played well, and they're now facing a lower bracket run where they need to win 5 best of 5s to win the championship. So they could do it. They're always obviously talented. They could roll it back to the beginning of the season when I had them as the best team, but I think it's going to be tough. It's just they've gotten themselves into a bad spot, and it's hard to climb out of this hole.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, I think that's basically it for this video. Again, thank you to Thrive Fantasy. If you want to help support the channel, help support me, use the promo code PIKEL. If you deposit $100, you get 4 $20 contest entries after you play in a contest. You get a 100% deposit match, $10, 2 $20 entries. Thanks, Alex, in his initial appearance on the channel. Hopefully he comes back sometime soon, maybe in a shorter format where we're not spending an hour talking about the LEC, but that generally happens to me when I talk about these like bigger picture kind of things. Any final words?
No, just thanks for having me on. I always love talking about League of Legends, so it's fun stuff. Thanks for inviting me. All
right, well, thank you, Alex, and thank you everybody watching. That's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.